Today we're going to talk about the characteristics of life, and as you can see from the PowerPoint, life comes in all different kinds of forms, complexities, from really simple like bacteria to really complex like humans or koala bears and everything in between. Even funky things like mushrooms and fungus that don't quite fit with plants or animals. But we'll get into all that. First, we need to talk about what it means to be alive. And to do that, we need to go back to middle school terms a little bit. Biotic and abiotic. So biotic is a term that refers to anything that is living or was once living. You've got a picture of a pond scene here on the PowerPoint. What do you see in the pond, or what do you know would live in the pond that would be considered living? You might say things like the fish, the plants, the beetles, the butterflies, any of that will work. Now, the other side of what makes the pond work is the abiotic factors. These are things that are not living, never were living, never will be living. These air, nutrients in the soil, rocks, things like that, they're going to help the living things succeed, but they themselves are not living, even though they're really important. Now, again, we're going to have to talk about certain criteria that make you qualify to be in the club of living. It's kind of like an exclusive club. You have to meet all the criteria to get in, and if you don't even meet one, you're out. So to make sure you're in the club of life, we got to have some criteria, and here's what they are. There's roughly 12, and you can get them all in a quick shot using the STERNGRR spider. Now, STERNGRR is an acronym that gives you the first letter of the first 8 of these criteria. The S stands for synthesis, the T for transport, the E for excretion, the R for regulation, the N for nutrition, the G for growth, the second R for respiration, and the final R for reproduction. Now, all of these 8 processes put together makes up your metabolism, which is all the chemical processes in your body that work constantly to keep you alive. If this stuff stops, if that metabolism stops, you die. Don't want those to stop. Now, the other 4 criteria to be alive are you have to be able to respond to your environment, stimulus, react, move around. You have to have a genetic code, which is your DNA. Everything we know of that's alive has DNA. You have to be made of cells. Can't be made of iron or plastic or silica. As far as we know, everything is what's called carbon-based and organic. And everything that we know that is carbon-based is made of cells. And finally, you have to be able to do what's called evolve or change over time. Now, I'm not talking about you physically, the individual changing, growing wings or a beak or feathers. Your species, your population over many generations has to be able to change in general terms as the environment gives it different pressures. We see this in humans with higher intelligence, with our better education, quicker growth to maturity because we have better nutrition, living longer, which we have because of our better technology in the medical field. And we'll get into all of that individually in class. So, back to the spider and the 8 processes. We'll go through them one at a time. As we go through, feel free to pause, and you need to fill out your flip chart in your notebook. Synthesis. You've done this your whole life. It just is to make or to build something. If you've ever had Legos or blocks, you've built a block house, you synthesize the house. Fancy word for building stuff. In biology and in your body, you build proteins from amino acids. And those proteins are going to be long chains of connected amino acids. It's kind of like having a Cheerio, and then in elementary school you make a bunch of Cheerios on a necklace, and it stops being a Cheerio and starts being a necklace. It's the same idea. It's made of repeating units. We also see this in complex carbs, which are made of individual simple sugars hooked together. And we'll talk about that in class as well. Transport. Your body needs to move chemicals and compounds around in your body so that you don't die. Plants do this as well. They use their xylem, which is like a water subway system, to move water from the soil up through the stem to the leaves so that they can use that water to live. They also have a separate subway system called the phloem for food transport. So they transport nutrients from the soil, same up through the stem to the leaves so they can grow and have nourishment. You and I, in our bloodstreams, carry oxygen and what's called carried on hemoglobin through our body so that our muscles can continue to work. Without oxygen, we can't function anymore. If you've ever done weightlifting and maxed out and done reps to failure, failure is when your muscles no longer have access to oxygen and they literally just stop. So that's really important. And this doesn't happen in just oxygen, it's lots of compounds. Excretion is pretty important. It's to remove waste from your body. If you don't remove waste, usually through the act of urinating and pooping, which you should do every day if you don't, talk to somebody. If you don't do that, all those waste products build up in your body, and your body can do something called going septic. When your body goes septic, you are so toxic that your body stops working and you die. So it's really important to exchange those wastes and get them out so that you can continue living. Regulation is to maintain balance or homeostasis. Your body has so many different chemical compounds that have to stay in balance, and if they go out of balance, you could die. So for instance, we have insulin. If you have a family or if you yourself are diabetic, you know about insulin. It is the protein that's produced when blood sugar is high. So if you have too high of blood sugar, you go into a sugar coma and you can die. If you have too low of blood sugar, you don't have the energy to keep functioning in the day, and again, you can die. So you got to keep that balance. Same thing with temperature. If you get too hot, like over 100 degrees, like high fever, your brain can literally start to break down and melt and you have brain damage. That's why it's important to break fevers when you have them. If your temperature gets too low, you can freeze to death. That's called hypothermia. But there's some nice balance that we need to stay in that range, and that's what your body's constantly fighting to do. And there's other examples, we'll get into them, but that's regulation. Nutrition is pretty important. Nutrition is how you get nutrients and energy. Now, there's a couple ways that different animals can get nutrition. You and I are called heterotrophs. Hetero in Latin means other, troph means feeder, so we're other feeders. We have to eat other things to maintain energy and nutrients. So you might eat the chicken after it's cooked. But these things are going to help you have energy so that you can do the next thing, which is grow and develop. Now, some critters are called autotrophs. Auto means self, troph means feeder. These are things like plants, like the orange, like the tomato, like the onion. They don't need to take in food from others. They simply use water, carbon dioxide, and nutrients from the soil. So they can self-feed, and in turn they feed us, and then when we die and decompose, we feed them. It's a nice cycle. So growth, we already kind of mentioned, but that's the next criteria to be alive. Every living thing must grow over time. Now, you were once a little baby, and I'm sure you're a little bit bigger than you were, now. So you had to grow to go from the baby you to the you now. That is a characteristic of life. Even bacteria grow. Bacteria they're single-celled critters. Look at those separate. They tend to grow to a smaller extent than us, and they get certain size and they just split off. Now that's called binary fission. That gets into reproduction. And we'll talk about that in a second. The other thing is respiration. Everything has to respire. Now, you were sort of told a half-truth in middle school. Everybody thinks of respiration as breathing, which is true. That is one type of respiration. You take in oxygen, and the oxygen goes into your lungs, to your bloodstream, through your heart, where it's pumped to all your cells so that your muscles can work, and then you exhale carbon dioxide, which is a toxin. It's one of those waste products you gotta get rid of. Now, the carbon dioxide is given off by your cells, flows in your blood to your lungs, and that's what you breathe out. So that's one type of respiration. Now, there's other gases you exchange. When you fart, you release methane. And methane is another one of those waste products that if you hold in, it's bad and you'll go septic. So as embarrassing as it is, when you gotta fart, you gotta fart. Let it out. Reproduction is a form of, it's a mechanism to make more of your species. Now, there's a couple of different ways that species can reproduce. You can have sexual reproduction, where individuals have to find another mate to mix their DNA to make a whole unique new individual that's not quite the same as mom or dad. It's a new mixture. And that's good when your environment is variable, when it changes a lot, so that even in a time of strife and stress, the species will go on, the population will go on. When the environment's stable, some species can simply clone or copy themselves. They just split. They don't need a partner. They make an exact copy of themselves, kind of like you cutting yourself right down the middle and each half becoming a new whole, and you've got, U1 and U2. And so that's called asexual reproduction. And some species use seeds, some use eggs, some use sperm. In the spring, the plants put their sperm, which is called pollen, all over our stuff, which I think is a little bit rude, and it makes us sneeze, which is a little bit gross. But we'll talk about the plants later and their rudeness. Responding to the environment. You must be able to respond to your environment to be alive. Now, if I were to throw a ball at you, you might respond by either jumping and getting hit or jumping and catching it. But either way, you responded. And not all organisms have such grand gestures when they respond. Plants respond slowly. If you put a plant, this is now a plant, by a window and the window's here and the sun is shining, the plant will slowly, over many days, move toward the sun. It won't move within a few seconds, but if you record it over many days, it'll move. And that is a type of response. And we'll get into the other types as we go through the semester. We've already talked about the DNA, genetic code. So if you scroll through the PowerPoint, if you have any questions, let me know tomorrow. We'll go over it the first part of class.